I'm Chris Busa. I'm so lucky to be standing here with a picture of my father by my side. It is actually taken in my house, and some of my father's paintings are hanging directly behind him. Here is a very nice print of a Robert Motherwell, and that's my dining room, my couch. And this is my father he must have been 78 or 79 at this time. When he was a young man, in this book about him that I produced for a show at the Art Association, there was an earlier photograph. Is that visible? Yeah. So you can see the transformation. He had a lot of different styles. He wore beard sometimes. He colored his hair with shoe polish sometimes. He wore suits with paint splattered on him because he'd go to a cocktail party 3 minutes after getting out of his studio. And it was kind of a hilarious way to grow up in New York City, in the art world, in Greenwich Village, and hear all the stories about these wonderful people. And as I said earlier, the experience of coming to Provincetown in the summers was a pattern of many of the abstract expressionists in New York, including people like Motherwell, who was a neighbor down the block, and the whole mishpoka, as my father used to say. So it was a lovely way to be. There was a lot of Duchampian impishness in how an artist lives in his actual life. And I think the idea of an art colony is that people gather here because they found a way to function in a kind of gift economy as opposed to a capitalist economy, is the way I define the art world. The gift economy being, if you don't have money to have the dentist fix your kid's teeth, then you give him a painting and he fixes your kid's teeth. And that's the way I grew up. Go to the dentist in New York, and all the paintings on the wall were my father's. So I thought, oh, this is great. You don't need money. You just trade art. So that's the gift economy. So, and you know, some of the funny stories, like my father always taught at universities, like Cooper Union, New York University, Art Students League, Brooklyn College, and then he started teaching at universities around the country after a period in Provincetown where he had patrons and he could paint for a decade without having to teach. But with 5 kids in the family, he took a job at the University of Minnesota, where he eventually became the chairman of the art department and stayed there for a quarter century. And that was a great experience as well. But one thing that was funny was that he would get audited by the IRS, and they'd always question his painting expenses. He says, you make a certain amount of money as a professor, you don't make so much money selling these paintings, but you take an awful lot of expenses out. And the IRS is, I think we're going to have to change the way you file. We're going to have to call painting a hobby and not a profession. And my father said, whoa, 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 whoa. We're going to have to change the way I file these expenses, and we're going to call them a medical deduction, and I take it as a disease. Painting, the idea of being an artist is a disease, and I want a medical deduction for my art supplies. So, I mean, a little humor goes a long way in some of the disheartening moments in an artist's life. The difficulty of surviving on radishes and a little milk, moisture and dust. And that's why I think artists are always good cooks. And this is something you and I have talked about. My father also, in that regard, was an excellent cook. He could take anything and make it delicious. Maybe just the way he ground the garlic and mixed it with some olive oil, or made a pesto sauce, or something that took a little finesse. So now, I'll also mention that growing up in this community and maintaining the ties for now many years, since the magazine that Ray Elman and I started in 1985 is now 31 years old. it's a chunk of history that's very significant. And one thing that's happened since the magazine began, it began the year that my father died in 1985. And I felt that our mission statement became to be, what do you preserve when one generation passes and the new generation comes up and decides to sift through it? And that was a big motivation because we knew such top people, the people in this show that, from Jack Kahn and Michael Mazer, every just so dense congregation. But we wanted to find a more detailed way to document the thinking of the creative process, how artists really function, how they are practical people, they want to get things done, they enjoy life, and there's something about the vitality of a genuine artist that is crystallized by something Robert Motherwell said about this very image that was, I believe it was Norma Holt's book. It was hanging in my house for a while. I had a copy of it, and Robert Motherwell, who was a neighbor, had stopped by to drop something off, and he saw the photograph of my father, and he says, looked at it for a while, and he said, his youth shows through his age. And I thought, well, that's the vitality of a lifetime of living with integrity as an artist. You know, there's something, you don't get this wizened, crippled, bitter look, you know. And it always made me feel sunny inside to feel a liberated soul. The artists seem to possess just out of that necessity to only be themselves. And why it may be a disease to be an artist, but it's one of those good diseases if you end up fulfilling yourself. And most artists do, because artists function through symbolism, not through reality. I mean, the painting that, you know, there are artists that paint money, and they paint it pretty well, and they go into a store and they want to buy a TV, and they say, this is a $500 bill, this is money, I made it. I would like to get a TV and get the change in American cash, please. And the people who got away with this were famous artists. You know, if de Kooning did that, or Franz Klein, they could pay their bar bills for a summer in Provincetown. So that's part of the spirit of the community. It's not just an academic workshop. It's that involves kids, families, the whole shebang. It involves quarrels and slights and happiness and joys, but there is the feeling that we both shared, a marvelous thing, and I think I got that instinct from my father.